Failure to knit going one direction is extremely common with vintage knitting machines, and most of the time it's minor. This is the carriage for a Corona CH 1500. All the models are very much more alike than different. This one arrived in my hands basically working, but it frequently missed knitting one direction and would knit better the other direction. When that happens, it's one of two things. First of all, if you're a brand new knitter, you won't even realize in this position, needles that are brought forward will not knit back from that position. You need to move to 2, and there's a 1 and a 2 on each side. Also, for stockinette knitting, the primary choice of setting is M on the SAM button. But also, I knew all that, and mine would misbehave. And what I finally did was over and over oiling and letting the oil drip out, because I determined that a flipper was sluggish, and that's why it knitted sometimes and not others. And that happens to other people too. It's quite common in older machines, especially if they've been stored for a while. Mine's been working well for a while now, but I've been corresponding with other Corona knitters while I worked on this series, and they have reminded me that this happens. One of my friends is suffering from just that thing. So Jack will explain what to do more precisely and show you how it works.
All right, this is the button she used, the 1 and 2 position. And if you'll notice, that position, this is the scoop that the needle butt, and yes, I'm being a butt again. But this is the path it comes in. It has to go this way, has to come around here. This little flipper goes back and forth, so it's going this way. It has to trip this lever, and then it'll come back out right there. This one again, there's your 1 and 2 position. So needle butt comes in, here I'm going, flip, whoops, over the top. Can't go that way, gotta go this way, and out I come. So if you'll notice, going in each direction, these guys need to be really fast. Needle butt, needle butt, needle butt, needle butt. That's about how fast they go through.
Actually, even faster. Click, click, click,
yeah,
click,
if
click,
you're
click,
a really fast knitter, but that's what you got to have is several times per second these flippers have to flip. And if they don't, they're on a shaft under this screw head. Right there. You don't want to back that screw out without really knowing what you're doing and without taking this completely apart, cover off knobs askew. And
that's not a DIY for most people.
But Aerocroil, best stuff in the world for loosening things in one little application. The Deep Soak in Mystery Oil is the ultimate solution to an older machine with dried lubrication and possibly some felty fuzz in there. But this Croil, and I'm on a pig mat, P-I-G, it is the ultimate tool for hazmat safety with different chemicals. It absorbs everything, and you can throw it in the trash. But you have to be careful with this stuff. It flows very quickly. You'll notice I'm going up to meet it. Watch it come down the tip, just a drop. And then you want to work that flipper and tilt it in a couple of different directions so that it's actually going under this screw head and down onto the shaft.
And we can see action from it immediately, but it continues to work for hours and hours.
Yes, this product was designed during the Second World War, just prior to it, because aircraft were having such a hard time flying in moist air. So a lot of the metal pieces were absorbing moisture, and the pilots had to be their own mechanics starting in the First World War. So this aerocroil was in your toolkit to put a drop on to let it creep down so that hopefully things like your flaps and the flap cables and the rods and the rudder cables would loosen up again with this croil.
Is that where you learned about this?
Oh, yeah.
Air Force? Oh, I never knew.
It is designed to creep in between two pieces of metal, whether it's a cable and a pulley or a pulley and a shaft. And it's actually made in the Carolinas. There's only one Cano lab, and it's in the Carolinas. In North Carolina, where aircraft started.
There is some information on our website about places we've found to get it.
Right, this came from a gun shop. And the reason gun shops keep it is the same reason. If you haven't fired a rifle in 3 or 4 years, the first thing they do is go in and soak it with the aerocroil, and then it'll go to working again. Show you one more time on this flipper. Go up to meet the spout, and there you go. A drop is all it really takes.
What I think, and you can tell me if you think I got it right, I think my initial hand cleaning, because the machine didn't arrive very dirty, hand cleaning and oiling got it basically running. I did not deep soak it because it didn't look as though it needed it. But when we do deep soak, even so, sometimes we have to use the croil. And I think what had gone on here was some oxidation on one of the flipper posts. And the deep soak doesn't always get that out where the croil eventually does.
Yes, I have upon occasion had to take a flipper post apart. And I don't mind doing that. I don't have any trouble getting them all back together. You stack the spring and the retainer, and then you take
but everybody's eyes are glazing over. That's not an everybody kind of job.
It quite often takes 5 hands to do it. Now, if you'll notice, here's this flipper on this post. This flipper's on the same post. And you'll see this one moves by itself or with this one. So when you're doing it, you might want to get my fat hand out of the way, right down on the top of this plate also, which is the moving part of this flipper. So anywhere down the length of this shaft, it can get a little bit of corrosion, and it doesn't take much, as you said, oxidation to cause sluggishness. And the sluggishness is why it works one way and not the other way.
It's very hard to spot even by hand flipping. Jack can often do it when I can't, because usually they don't freeze into position.
No.
They most of the time they'll move, and I'll say, everything's moving. And he says, but listen to the rhythm. This one is moving faster. That's the way it should be.
Sometimes they will be so nice as to freeze in an interim position. And then you know when you've got it freed up. But you see, that croil is making this part move smoother already. Showing this one didn't really need it, but it never hurts to put a drop in the places where you know it is going to need to move rapidly.
Yeah, a couple of questions always arise. Is this what we use for regular lubrication? And it is not. It's a special purpose item.
That's right. And you're going to need to knit with waste yarn until you quit getting the smell of the croil out on the yarn.
It can stain. So
yeah,
run some cheap acrylic white so you can see when it's quit happening. If you can find industrial yarn on cones, 2 strands of 224 will run through this just beautifully. And then the fact that you've wasted it is still only maybe $1.50 worth of yarn, and was well worth the investment.
This is another spot where sometimes this is too sluggish, doesn't seat up against its stop. And if you'll notice, that post wobbles in the hole. You can see it.
Is it supposed to?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little worn, but that makes it very easy to put a drop of croil right there. So we've already noticed a few places where 1 drop of croil while you're underneath it is going to make a lot of difference in the operation of your carriage. Then knit the croil out like you said, with waste yarn.
Another thing that came up recently is, should you oil this channel? This is where the back of the carriage fits onto the back of the needle bed. And the answer is yes. Mine was running perfectly and both areas looked clean to my eyes, but because I had gotten it out after putting it away a while and was determined to really make a thing of enjoying using it, I did lubricate this area, and some black, what do you call that when it works out black from metal on metal?
That's oxidation.
Okay, so oxidation worked out, and it drips onto the back of the bed, and then you have to dab it up with something. But you don't want to leave it in there because it will gradually get stiffer and stiffer, and it's not great for the metal. So the answer is yes for two reasons. It'll run better, and it'll help the metal stay in good condition.
Right, the oxidation, which this I think is stainless.
Sure looks like it.
So it's probably a good quality stainless. And so it's not going to be the one oxidating, but if I'm not mistaken, the curled rail that it rides on is just a regular steel rail. And
so they may have worked off of that. But my point is, to my eyes, there was not an issue.
Right.
And yet if black goo oozed out, there was some.
Correct. And the point I was going to make is it will cause friction, and that it'll slowly get harder and harder and harder to push. And I have seen you, an experienced knitter, lean into pulling the carriage from one direction to the other, and then you all of a sudden realize, ha-ha,
oh, yeah.
6 months ago this was easy.
Knitting is some work. This particular machine has an extraordinarily light touch. If you have something like a pass-up, it's never going to be as easy as this one should. But if you're shaking at the end of every row and wheezing, it's a sure sign something is way too stiff, even if it's knitting.
Here's another thing, your SAM button. You can see there's the movement that button creates. You should always put a drop under here to make sure that when it moves, it's moving the corresponding flipper. The button actually only offers an impediment to the movement of that flipper. The spring is holding it. But you see that? It jumped 2 positions there. It didn't...
Well, A is for automatic patterning.
Right.
M is for stockinette. And S basically stands for slip. It's used to get a free pass on this machine, and I haven't explored it that much. It's not a setting we use that often because there are other ways of achieving the same thing.
All right, here's the point I'm making. You can go past M, and you can see movement on your flipper.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and that will cause a problem if that flipper is not well lubricated so that it pops right back. The first time you use it, that dial should, because this is all spring-loaded in here, but you can go past M, and the first time you use it, it should pull this back, and everything should be fine. But it's another point to make sure while you're putting in croil, and you know you're going to knit it back out, put it in a number of places so that when you need it to, there's another one.
And the good news for my friend who's having issues is that very rarely is there actually something missing or broken.
Right.
If it's knitting one direction, most of the time something's just too stiff or set wrong on the other direction.
Absolutely. We've seen this in hundreds of carriages of all different makes and models. If it knits correctly one direction, left to right, and not right to left, or vice versa, it's in the carriage, it's not in the bed, and it's 99% of the time a sluggish flipper. See, even these two, this one's quick.
It can happen that in shipping, perhaps, or if it was dropped, it whizzed off the end of the bed. Breakage does occur.
Right. These tips will break off.
But you should be able to see with your eyes if you have the same equipment on the left side and the right side of the carriage. They're almost always symmetrical.
Yeah, and everything should work the same.